you wonder, like, what is the right situation for them, right? And this is a different conversation because Paxton's not playing, so you're measuring that versus going to Salzburg, which he's linked to. Is that a better move for him? Maybe. Salzburg's definitely going to have much more of a
I feel
reason
like
to play him and develop him than Philadelphia Union, who have got a good team. They're close to top of the league right now. They've gotten a lot of draws, but Paxton Aronson or the young players in the Philadelphia Union, even though they have this strong academy, are not being used in the way that you would think they would in this situation, or given the club's sort of philosophy.
Gavin says he wants Paxton to join Leeds. Let's tap the brakes there, Paxton. Gavin, excuse me. I would say with Paxton, he has the benefit of his brother kind of laying the foundation of what people should expect from an Aronson. And he's already shown it. You can see it in the U20s that he's got that same type of drive and ambition, and they see the game very similarly. Obviously, he's going to have a couple different components to their game, but I'm not saying that he's a known quantity, but even if he's not playing for the Union, I think you kind of have an idea of what he's going to be about, given that how they both grew up. So I think his brother has done him a service. Now let's talk about another player that you mentioned that also got an F from Mr. Chuck Booth. Chuck Booth just throwing out the Fs like no big deal. Hoppy was one of them.
Who was the other one you said?
It was Matthew Hoppy, Josh Sargent, and this last one, Ricardo Pepi. He gave an F to Ricardo Pepi.
Yeah.
And, obviously, as Chuck says, his struggles are well chronicled. They had teams like Wolfsburg and Atletico Madrid were inquiring about Ricardo Pepi. I mean, the guy was in a great run of form.
Ajax and Helleres left, and I mean, Ajax is always going to have a pipeline of good young stars, but at least you're in a stable situation where you go like, I'll go punch for punch with anybody. Like that self-belief has a lot more value in an Ajax system than it does in a relegation fighting Bundesliga team.
Well, let's catch you up on what's happening with Augsburg. They fired their coach and they brought in, his name is Enrique Maaßen or Maben. I'm doing my best here. It's kind of the weird German B.
Oh, Maaßen.
And Maaßen. Okay, so I was right the first time. Enrico Maaßen. And his last job was coaching the Borussia Dortmund reserves. And he did it well. They actually gave him a contract until 2024, but he jumped, and they gave him a bigger and better contract because he was doing so well and got them promoted to the third league, 3 Liga in Germany. But he left to take this Augsburg job, and I like this for Ricardo Pepi because this is a coach that clearly, he's only 38. This is a coach that clearly knows how to work with younger players, and I think that's going to do a great deal of good for Ricardo Pepi in a lot of different ways. But also, they just got rid of Grigoric, who was like their number 9. He could play underneath as well, but he led the team in goals last year for Augsburg with 9. He's gone, and he's going to Freiburg because he wanted to get a little taste of Europe. Freiburg wanted him a couple years ago, and now he's had the chance to do it. But they made a straight swap. So Freiburg ends up giving over Ermedin Demirovic. Excuse me. He's a 24-year-old striker, Bosnian international, and 2 goals and 3 assists in 31 appearances last year. I think only 9 starts for Freiburg. But Freiburg was good, finished 6th in the Bundesliga, so clearly had an impact. So there's still, it's not like Gregoric has just left and they didn't fill the hole. Then Ricardo Pepi can fill that void, Heath. They got somebody coming in, but I think there's some signs pointing to him getting better, getting some more valuable minutes, maybe hopefully being played in his best spot. I know they played him wide a lot just to try to get him on the field. I feel like Ricardo Pepi is going to score a few goals, and he needs to get that first one. He hasn't scored since October in a meaningful competition. So it's really important for him to do that.
We know coaches can make and break careers. And when I was again, to go back to a little anecdote to my experience, we brought in Germany during my sort of 5-coach run over 2 years. The former Dieter Eilts was his name. He's former national team player, was the U21 national team coach that had done fantastic with Germany in the Euros. And he struggled at the first team level because he didn't understand. He had been in this environment where a little more discipline, a little bit more, coach and subordinates in terms of young players. He was great with young players within the club, but he struggled with some of the bigger egos. And so from a coaching level there's a transition there, right? From the reserves to a first team because of the type of players you're going to have around and the egos. But for a guy like Ricardo Pepi, who's the age that he is, that's a fantastic situation for him to be in. If he can earn that respect and that trust, or if that coach has that patience to go, you know what, I'm not going to judge him based on a final product. I'm going to work with him. And maybe Pepe's going to have some bad days, or maybe he's going to have a bad attitude from time to time. But I'm going to work with him because I want to get the most out of that player, versus other coaches that go, nah, I'll just go with somebody else. And if they're in a stable situation, you now have the ability to do that. Now, again, if they're fighting relegation, then one's in, one's out. You're going to go with whoever has the hot hand. It's different. But I think that could be, it's best case scenario for him staying at Augsburg, I guess I would say.
Listen, I'm just happy that things changed because the situation he currently was in wasn't great. And so I'm glad the coach, and remember when Parkhurst came on, Michael Parkhurst came on and said, "Oh, I was coached by that guy when I went to Augsburg." And yeah, he's not a great coach. He wouldn't be a good fit for Ricardo Pepi. And we all just laughed, like, why wouldn't Pepi or anybody like do that type of research to know where he was going and what he was inheriting, what situation? But I know that it's difficult at times, especially if you have a chance to make a big move and you can take care of your family in one fell swoop and you have a chance to go to a top 5 league in Europe. I get it. But he maybe would have benefited from staying in MLS for at least one more year. But maybe Jesus Ferreira wouldn't have emerged as the guy for FC Dallas like he is now. All right, some other transfer news. Let's go the other way, though. This is kind of looking back and what's in place for some of those guys that have to fight through some situations that aren't great. We've got Malik Tillman, who was with Bayern Munich. We got called him into the last 4 games for the U.S. men's national team in June. Apparently heading to Rangers. I want to get your thoughts on that. And then Shaq Moore leaving Tenerife in Spain to sign with Nashville. I thought that was a pleasant surprise. And kind of, I guess in some ways, I wanted to ask you about Greg Berhalter's comments in different ways. Like now, Brandon Vasquez crushing it, 10 goals and 4 assists for Cincinnati. You have Jeremy Ebobisse's got 11 goals and 1 assist for the San Jose Earthquakes.
Both not selected for the All-Star team.
They got selected to the All-Star team. Both of those guys
did not get selected.
Oh, did not get selected, which is weird, but not weird when you think of the big names that are in.
Yeah.
But you have those 2 guys that are kind of doing what Greg Berhalter is saying is stay in the league and dominate the league, and that could give you a better chance. Maybe that's intimated. I'm kind of putting words in Greg's mouth there, but interesting thing. So you got Shaq Moore coming to Nashville, coming back to MLS to get some minutes. We'll see if that helps him. Maybe playing next to Walker Zimmerman is an added benefit in that regard. What are your thoughts on Tillman, Shaq Moore, and then give me a little bit of insight on Brandon Vasquez and Ebobisse, who've been blowing up. And do you think they have a real chance of maybe sneaking onto this roster?
I mean, I certainly think you bring him in for a look in September, right? Where you just go, well, I'm going to find out.
Those are our 2 last games. Is that the time to
I mean, you bring him into camp, you give him a few minutes because if they stay hot through the end of the year or they're in the playoffs, and you're joining the team right leading up to a World Cup with a hot hand, why not bring him? You got 3 extra players now that you can bring into the team or bring into your roster. So I don't think our national team is 26 deep right now in terms of solid positions or ones that are shoo-ins. Now you naturally get to 26 players through depth of saying, okay, now we've got your 18 and who's the next one? You're going to get to 26. We've got plenty of players in the pool. But if a few of those guys have the hot hand, I'm taking them over like, you're kind of just the 26th player in my team versus a guy has been the 30th player or 35th player, but is in incredible form right now and a goal scorer. I'm going with that person. So I think you bring him in for sure.
Even if you don't play them, just to see how they interact with the group and see how they perform, because sometimes those games can be tough when you're only in for a week and you don't really do any like hardcore training,
Yeah, but I'm just trying to think of, again, all I know is the 2010 cycle, and you had in that window players who hadn't been in the national team for a long time were defender Clarence Goodson. Attackers were, again, Robbie Finley, Edson Buttle, and Hercules Gomez, part of the national team pools for a long time, but weren't like key to the qualifying process, weren't key to that, and were important parts of the DNA of that roster, and almost ones that you knew. Robbie Finley a little more surprising, but Edson Buttle in the form that he was in, and Hercules Gomez, you're kind of like, they're definitely going. There wasn't like, when they were coming up with the roster selection of 23 out of the 30 players of us that were in camp, they weren't 2 players that I questioned whether they'd make the team because of what the potential value could be in a closing minutes or stoppage time or in the second half, or you deplete yourself on the depth chart through injuries or whatever could happen. It made sense. I don't know. What's your take on those players coming in and again, staying in the league? Do you think it's actually as valuable as Greg says, or do you think these are examples of players that are probably not getting the respect because they stayed in the league instead of going somewhere else?
I guess the one thing to bring into the equation for Vasquez and Ebobisse is that were they going to make a move anywhere else? I mean, some of the players that we're referencing are pretty young and have a lot more of that potential attached to them than maybe an Ebobisse and Vasquez. But to your point, and based on history in 2010 in particular, when Bob took those 3 strikers that were just hot hands at the right time. And when we mentioned it with Greg, we've talked about this before and had an interview with him. He said, well, all 3 of those players that you mentioned were all strikers. So it bodes well for those guys if they keep scoring, that they're going to maybe get a look. And let's not be naive. This is not just for our national team, but for national teams around the world. we're going to have a significant injury. Like somebody's going to be out, or two that aren't going to be a part of the World Cup, which is going to be, we already lost Miles Robinson, which has been pretty impactful.
I would say 3 players, Jimmy. 3 players from now that we expect, whether it's from injuries, form, or otherwise.
Isn't that crazy? God, yeah. I can't even wrap my head around which 3 players that are going to be. And I don't even want to get into it right now.
I mean, Oguchi Onyewu shouldn't have gone to the 2010 World Cup because of how injured he was, but he went. But that was a player that we were like, oh man, that's a big name player.
Right.
I mean, he was still sort of in rehab and like hobbling around at our.
Yeah, he wasn't 100%, not even close.
Yeah. And he went because you use a spot hoping that this guy who's been so big for the national team could come in and figure it out. But generally speaking, that was one that could have dropped out. Steve Cherundolo dropped out of a World Cup, and I think Frankie Hayden ended up going. And you look back at history, and there's a number of guys. A lot of those stories happened in like the pre-camp, which is crazy.
Right. Well, Chris Armas ducked out of 2002, and Pablo Mastroianni jumped in, and then all of a sudden Pablo had a great game against Portugal, and everybody's like, "Who's this Pablo Mastroianni guy?" You know.
But if you think about
that's what happens.
Yeah, 20 to 30 games from now, it's part of the game. So you might lose 1 or 2 players, or you might,
which is intense.
Something. And it could be a simple, Jimmy. We're not talking about ACLs. It could be a hamstring.
Right.
Hamstring. 6 weeks.
Right.
You miss the tournament. Right. Yeah. You come back right after the tournament. You go and you continue your career. It doesn't have to be, some sort of like 6-8 month out major injury. It's the timing of things. You pull up. And
I don't know if I can emotionally handle any of our big players getting hurt, but we do have a penchant for whatever reason with this young team that we do have some guys getting hurt quite often, more often than I would like. All right, with regard to Shaq Moore, I think it's a good move for him. If he wasn't going to get minutes, if he couldn't find a team to get into maybe La Liga itself, maybe didn't want to swim in the waters of La Liga 2, gets himself in a team that's next to a national team defender in Walker Zimmerman. They play a good style of defense in particular. He'll be able to get forward. I think he'd be a nice addition to Nashville. And then with Malik Tillman, with Joe Aribo leaving Rangers, I think that opens up some space in the middle of midfield for him to potentially fill that void. I mean, I think he's going to obviously have competition, but Gio von Bronckhorst is a great coach. I like what Rangers did and almost got to become champions of the Europa League. So there's something there within that team. And when you have that type of success, of course, bigger clubs are going to come in and poach your best players. But that could be a good spot for Malik Tillman to get in there and hopefully be trusted in a meaningful way to get some responsibility from a coach that knows what he's doing and obviously has plenty of experience from playing himself. So I think these are all good moves for these guys. They seem positive, and hopefully they can turn them into something very special. All right.